who's writing the book, who's paying who to write the history. Because this is the same as the narrative about Ukraine, that Vladimir Putin woke up on the 24th of February 2022, rolled out of bed, peeled a baby, dipped him in salt, ate it, and said, stuck a pin in a map and said, I'll invade the biggest landmass in Europe just for fun. This is an insane narrative. And that if and when Russia, achieves its goals to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, they're immediately going to attack Poland. Why? Why would they do that? Why would they want to attack Germany? Why? If Putin was an imperialist, why didn't he attack Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the most irrelevant small land masses? Why would he not do that? Why would you pick the biggest landmass in Europe with the biggest NATO-trained army in Europe if you want to start a row? It's like going into a bar and saying, this guy likes to start fights. Pick the biggest, most muscular MMA fighter in the bar, go up and start a fight with him. Don't bash the three little 3-foot guys who are pissed drunk who don't know what they're doing. This is insane. And it's also the same narrative that carries through all of the narrative about Russia. For example, there are several nuclear power plants in Ukraine, several of them. Russia only controls one in Zaporozhye, okay? But apparently Russia's bombing the only nuclear power plant in Ukraine that it controls. So can someone explain to me why you're fighting a war, the country has 4 nuclear plants, you control one of them, why would you start bombing the one you control? It makes no sense. But then again, it doesn't have to make sense.
Like they bombed the Nord Stream pipeline. They tell you stuff that makes no sense.
Of course they did. Right? They have a little button on the Nord Stream. They can just turn the tap. As Putin said, we can just turn it off and that's it. No, let's bomb it.
That's not as fun, though. That's not as fun.
Yeah. It's just a fantasy narrative. And it all fits into this Star Wars drive-through narrative about Russia. We're the good guys. See, the West has become so morally hollowed out regarding how it's treated its own people. 40 million people in the United States living in poverty. Terrible, social fractures in the United States. Endemic racism, crime, addiction, suicide. An epidemic of suicide and addiction in the US. And by the way, happy people don't need to get high every day and they don't kill themselves, okay? So that's the first thing I'd say to the liberal-dominated, ultra-white governments of the United States. Are
you telling me it's not normal to have a record amount of your population, millions of people taking drugs so they can feel mentally sane, having a ton of people on quote-unquote.
Look, I'm a guy that likes a beer just like the next guy. I like a few beers. I like to sing a song. I like to lie on the beer. I like to relax. But these are symptoms of sick societies. And the people who are telling us they're going to cure the symptoms of the sick societies are the people who've caused the symptoms. It's like going to your doctor and I'm sticking a red hot poker in your ass, then spending the next 3 years telling you how he's going to slowly draw it out and everything's going to be fine. What we need to do and understand is that these tiny elites that control over 96% or 97% of global wealth dictate to us how the problems are all someone else's fault. It's Vladimir Putin's fault that Philadelphia, that there was 1,600 people last year died from drug overdose in Philadelphia. Somehow, some think tank, fantasist will come up with a reason that this is Russia's fault, Iran's fault, Saddam Hussein's fault, anybody's fault. Someone will come up with the reason, say, well, the reason we need to spend more on war than India, Russia, and China combined. The reason we need to do that is because we're under threat. But who are we under threat from? When was the last time the United States was invaded by anybody? The United States is under threat from the people running it. That's the only people. They're the only people, in my view, and this is being objective. I don't see any threat to the United States from it. The people coming across the border from Mexico are coming because the United States, the Monroe Doctrine, which in the 18th century decided that they were going to dominate the economic, political, and strategic landscape all around them. They wrote this shit down. They said, we're going to do that. And if anyone fucks with us, we're going to fuck them. Excuse the French. So this is...
It's cool on the channel.
This is the reality. So in the reality that, the guy that caused all the problems is the guy that's going to cure them all. And you believe that. That's you need to see a psychiatrist. You've got a problem. It's like if somebody today turned up and said, well, yeah, we've got the system of government. It's going to be really great. If the guys who actually founded the United States, who actually had some semblance of humanity and an ideology of liberty, freedom, and the idea that all men were created equal, we're so far from that now in the United States and in Europe, because the whole political environment in the US and in Europe is predicated on fear and an enemy. It's not about the welfare of the people in Europe. It's not about the welfare of the people in the United States. There's no money in this. There's no money in solving the problems. There's only money in fear, war, division, and being the fire brigade. And if you're going to be the fire brigade, you have to light lots of fires. Think about it.
The ruling class take advantage of how afraid Americans are. Like, we have police spending in New York that is 3 times higher than North Korea's military budget. If you ranked our police budget in terms of military, we'd be the 3rd highest military, only behind the United States and China. What is Americans so afraid of? Why are we okay with going to war with our neighbor? Let's go to what you were talking about earlier. We have 2 oceans, 2 whole ass oceans protecting us, which is why, to answer your question, why we never victims of invasions. We're in a very lucky spot in terms of geography, where we got natural defenses, being the oceans. The only thing that puts the United States at threat is United States foreign policy. Now, if I wanted to get specific about it, it'd be Israel. Like, you have people who said their anti-American sentiments come from American support of Israel. It come from United States bases illegally occupying other countries. So the only quote-unquote threat to America, to answer your question, is United States foreign policy. That's threatened the life of Americans overseas, the same way that Zionism threatened Jewish lives all around the world. Something else I want to get to, because there's so much things I want to break down in the glorious rants you're blessing us with today, is I'm a victim of American miseducation. I'll just start there, where they just tell you stuff that inherently made no sense. As someone who was a teenager who grew up in American public schools, I assumed that Americans defeated the Nazis. Like, the narrative that was told to us that Europe was on the ropes, everyone was on the ropes, and then America come in, and then we say today, I'm like, oh man, America defeated the Nazis. They'll tell you stuff, ridiculous stuff like MLK was the good one who advocated peace. White people liked him, even though he was dreadfully despised at the time. While also telling us that Malcolm X is one of the bad ones. Don't listen to Malcolm X. Malcolm X is the bad one. MLK is the good one. They won't listen. They also tell you that the Native Americans, indigenous Americans, got along with their colonizers, and if only they was more accommodating to their European neighbors, their whole genocide thing wouldn't have happened.
They were asking for it. They were like that chick in the short skirt. She was asking for it. This is the attitude. This is the attitude.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I promise to God, that's the narrative that they told you growing up. If only the goddamn indigenous people just went along. Mm-hmm. And I learned, and I explained this many times on RBN, around the time I graduated high school, around the time I dropped out of college, I was going on this decolonization process. I am the man I am now. I am the intellectual I am now because I ditched everything I fucking learned. Like, I was like a newborn at like age 19 and 20. While like, all right, I'm starting all the way over, because that's how much miseducation impacts people in this country. For example, like, people don't understand how crazy it is that we are seeing a remilitarized Japan. Before I got into politics, I was into history, which is why I was deeply into what you were saying. I learned a lot in your rants. I'm still a big student, a big advocate of learning history. You have Japan now that is accusing China of being aggressive and provoking China. Do you guys understand how crazy this is? Japan doubled their military spending over the last 3 years because they are afraid of the China threat. Guys, Google the rape of Nanjing.
Oh, I was about to say that. I mean, the Nanking Massacre, during the Nanking Massacre, 2 particular Japanese officers had a competition to see who could behead 100 people quickest. I mean, this is the level of brutality of the Imperial Japanese It's a fascinating point. And we didn't plan to mention that together, but
Yeah,
Nanking.
this is a good conversation. I'm enjoying it. Go ahead.
Yeah, this Nanking massacre, and I talk about this with some Chinese people. It's so repressed and kept down, but also the Opium Wars, this century of shame that the Chinese talk about, when the European powers basically invaded China, tore it to pieces, destroyed its civilization, all to get control of the opium trade. So the British, the Americans, and the French all got involved here. They all piled in, like they did in Suez 100 years later, to rape the resources of North Africa. They did it in China. And, they did it in Iraq. They went to war for a complete lie. I was tweeting about that all week. So These are not the good guys. These are not the good guys. We're not the good guys. I mean, I'm a white Irish guy. I mean, a lot of our people, the client sort of, we call them castle Catholics in Ireland, people who work for the British regime. These West Brits, we call people in Ireland, who are completely bought into this idea.
I think that's your version of Uncle Tom, right?
Yeah.
It's like your version of that.
We were the most energetic tip of the spear, if you like, for the British Empire. The Irish went around the world, the West Indies in particular, brutalizing people. We did it in the southern United States. We were very brutal people, the Irish, because the brutalized are the best dispensers of brutality in many ways, because we were the victims of centuries of British brutality and genocide, essentially. But mentioning Nanking, remember what the Japanese did in China. They want you to forget it. Get on and check out the massacre of Nanking.
Yeah, after this, and they just one of many. Like there were a lot of
many.
massacres. This is the one that just stands out the most because I've been reading a lot about this over the last few years. It's like, Jesus Christ, for Japan, keep China's name out of your mouth forever.
Will Smith moment.
Yeah, for real. Like the audacity. Let me see if I can find an article because there's so many of them. I'll probably be able to find one where Japan being like, China's being so aggressive. The China threat. Japan, they as I mentioned before, there was pressure by the United States to double the military, and they are working with Australia very closely. And the audacity of Japan that stole Taiwan, used Japanese imperialism to tell China what to do with Taiwan. If you understand history, you understand how the audacity of Japan, who is the biggest cuck nation in the world, probably next to Kenya, because the United States dropped a nuke on them. And the only reason you got me into this because you mentioned them and it got this rant started. But the United States dropped a nuke on them. They committed atrocities against the Chinese people as they going around in Europe and telling people that China is evil.
Yeah, but the other thing about the Americans, when it comes to nuclear weapons, something I find completely fascinating, right? The equivalent of the Americans telling the world who can and can't have nuclear weapons, right, is the equivalent of the only guy in your town who shot 2 people dead deciding who can have a gun.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. So the only country on earth who's ever dropped a nuclear weapon on a civilian population now decides who gets to have one. It's crazy, right?
And that's why they're mad at North Korea, because Kim Jong-un and the North Korean regime did the smartest thing they did by.
Well, North Korea would not exist if they didn't have a nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
And likewise, Israel may not exist if it didn't have a nuclear weapon. But we all have to pretend Israel doesn't have a nuclear weapon, even though everybody knows Israel has nuclear weapons. And, we're obsessed now at the moment with Vladimir Putin's going to nuke somebody. Vladimir Putin's never threatened to nuke anybody. I mean, I saw a French journalist yesterday asking him a question. Why do you keep saying you're going to nuke people? And he said, why did you bring it up? I didn't mention nukes. He kind of goes, yeah. Which is the reality. The Russians have a doctrine about nuclear weapons, okay? And by the way, the Russians do have the most advanced and the most nuclear weapons on Earth. The Russians could, would win a nuclear confrontation if anybody could win it, even to suggest somebody winning it. There's no winner, of course, but there's no way out of it once you begin this cascade of events that would start a nuclear war. And everybody in Europe, in the political elite, they all know that Ukraine isn't worth starting a nuclear war. There's far too many Zionists and predators on the the military-industrial complex will lose their big house in Florida, their girlfriends in Naples, all their cash in the bank. That'll all burn in a nuclear war. This is the thing that reassures me that we won't have a nuclear war because everybody's cash will go up in smoke as well. So this, in some ways, I think people are so greedy in the elites that they'd never allow a situation where this war would actually begin because there is no winner. It's insane. But Putin has never threatened a nuclear weapon. He actually said in St. Petersburg over the last couple of years, he said, we don't need to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. We're winning the war, basically. And they are winning the war. And they're winning the war slowly because they're not doing what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. They're not doing that. That's why people say, why is it taking Russia so long to defeat Ukraine? That's because the Russians consider Ukraine to be a brotherly people. Most people I know here in Russia consider the Ukrainians to be like the Scots and the Irish, to African nations very closely related in history and culture to European. They don't consider Ukraine their enemy. They consider Ukraine as a vassal state that's been hollowed out by the West and is now being used as a Trojan horse to destroy Russia, and it's failing terribly. Yeah, and this guy, Steve Rosenberg, is an awful asshole.
I want to get more info on that, but the West is filled with, on your point, the West is filled with monsters, and I spent on RBN. We haven't won a war in modern history. The United States, we don't win wars. We don't accomplish our objectives. We commit atrocities and we kill people. So you understand, they viewed Russia's military action in Ukraine through those lenses. So when they saw Russia go to Ukraine and they didn't commit mass atrocities, the same way we committed in Vietnam, the same way we committed in Iraq, the same thing that Israel is doing to Gaza right now. So they saw Russia not do that, and they view that as a loss. They're like, wait, you guys didn't murder everybody?
It's a weakness. It's a weakness. Yeah. And I think that's a fascinating point. It's a great point because, again, living here in Russia, and I don't know how many Westerners you'll hear talking about the experience of living here. I haven't met anybody in Russia. Now, I've been in trains with soldiers. I've been in towns that are getting bombed by the Ukrainians. I've been with the refugees. I've got that experience of being among these people. I've never met anybody who actually said, we hate Ukraine. We hate Ukrainians. What they hate, and the Russian people are far more educated about the realities, the mechanisms of this conflict. Who's behind it? The reality of the Maidan coup in 2014, when the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych, he was an imperfect guy, as many leaders are imperfect, as we know. Okay, Europe, the United States. Yanukovych was legitimately elected, but he was overthrown. That his government was overthrown by a CIA-backed coup. We heard Victoria Nuland picking the new government on a phone call, which was leaked. We heard her actually picking who would be the new prime minister. I mean, this is the level, the granular level of U.S. involvement in the destabilization of Ukraine. Now, remember, the Americans have been trying to destabilize Ukraine, not since 2006, 2014. The Americans began to destabilize the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1945, basically. They started to fund people like Stepan Bandera, a mass killer, a Nazi collaborator, Roman Shukevich, the OUN and the UPA, two radical, far-right, racist groups. They were funded and given weapons, arms and money and intelligence by the CIA. Operation Paperclip, Operation Red Sox, Operation Aerodynamic, all funded these groups in an attempt to destabilize the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and peel it away from Russian influence. Now, they were defeated. It was a catastrophe. But the American project to destabilize Ukraine and to cause this rift in the family, if you like, has been a long-term, and it's decades old. So this is the culmination of it. But the problem is they misjudged the reaction of Russia. They thought, we can destabilize Ukraine. We can peel it away. We can agitate for a conflict with Russia, which will bleed Russia dry, bleed Russia pale. Instead, they created a mega power. They've, emboldened Russia. They've inoculated the Russian economy
They
against
have like
sanctions.
the fourth largest economy now, right?
Well, the Russian economy now is completely intrinsic. It doesn't need anything from anywhere. It's got everything. The Chinese need Russian energy. Russia's the biggest energy superpower on Earth. It's got more energy resources than anyone on Earth. It's the biggest landmass on Earth. It's got 150 million people. China needs energy. Russia needs technology and mass manufacturing. China is the biggest manufacturing economy on planet Earth. And what has the American foreign policy done? It's welded these two giants together. Now, remember, Russia and China had historical difficulties in Manchuria. They've had territorial disputes, which have all been forgotten now because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Russia sees what's happening in Taiwan. China sees what's happening in Ukraine. It's failed. The econo-cultural war, which was thought up in the think tanks of Washington and London on Russia, has failed and failed really badly. That's why we're in a position now where escalation is the only forward motion for the West. The only other option for the West is to say, we got it really wrong. We screwed up. We're sorry. Let's settle this conflict. Let's send the UN in along a line of control. Let's cede this territory with plebiscites and referendums, Crimea. Let's do it all internationally. Let's do what we did in Cyprus. Let's do it. It's over. The war's over. No more killing. Let's rebuild Ukraine. Let's make it a non-NATO, a non-Russian zone. Let's do the best thing for the Ukrainian people. This is if the British and Americans cared about the Ukrainian people, nobody would be dead. They would have spent a fraction of the hundreds of billions of dollars they spent on weapons, most of which have been destroyed or stolen. A lot of the stuff has been stolen, and the cash has definitely been stolen. They would have spent a fraction on that to end this conflict on the basis of the Minsk Accords, Minsk 1 and 2, which the Ukrainians accepted, the Germans, the French, and the British all accepted that these regions in the east of Ukraine, Donbass, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Crimea, accepted that the people there wanted to remain associated with Russia. They accepted it. But when it comes to Russian voices saying we want our democratic will expressed, when it comes to that, nobody hears it. When it comes to the Kosovans in Serbia, everyone hears it. When it comes to, we're going to be greeted as liberators in Iraq after invading on the basis of a lie, everybody hears it. When it comes to, the poor Ukrainians who are without sin, invaded for no reason after bombing Donbass and Lugansk, after massacring their own people for a decade, using fighter jets to fire rockets at them, bombing them. 14 or 15,000 people died in 10 years in Ukraine, in Donbass, in shelling on both sides. And nobody noticed. Nobody cared. It only happened on the 24th of February, 2022. The world began on that date, just like it began when Malcolm X advocated for armed resistance against the apartheid state. That's when the movement for Black justice began, when the bad guy emerged. It didn't start with the brutal oppression of African Americans for nearly 2 centuries. Nothing begins there. It begins where we choose, on the date we choose. We keep kicking the dog until he bites us, and the whole history begins with the bite.
Yeah, and I deeply appreciate this education lesson, my friend. We definitely got to do this again. We're going to wrap up here soon because I don't want to take too much of your time. But you guys see the miseducation that we are discussing. I think this was a very educational episode here. There are a lot of people in the West that is confused about who actually defeated the Nazis, which is why you saw a veteran hug fucking Zelensky. and I don't want to be mean to that person. He's very old. He may be not as mentally sharp as he used to be. Maybe a victim of propaganda. I try to take it easy on victims of propaganda. But you guys see here, this is what that person is not like a outlier. Who did the most to defeat Nazi Germany?
Yeah,
I thought you tweeted this. I thought it was
McDonald's. I'm surprised McDonald's isn't up there. Or Burger King. Why not throw in Coca-Cola or Guinness? Because it's
Mickey Mouse.
If you go down to the very bottom, it says Jay-Z. Because what the fuck? That's insane. No.
Oh my God, this is so sad. It's sad, but this is why we do what we do, right? This is why I had to relearn everything I was taught, because if you ask me, I'm 33, let's just say 15 years ago, who won World War II? I was like, we won it. It was the United States and Normandy. this is how they program us. This is how they like so many people in America don't even know about the one China policy, for example. China's about to invade Taiwan. Okay. Invade themselves. That makes sense. But miseducation is one of the biggest weapons that they use against us to this day. Like, a lot of people don't even know that the Nazis, since we were talking about a lot of history, the Nazis was inspired by the United States in our treatment of indigenous people. They took direct lessons from them. And as you guys seen,
Lebensraum, they call it, living space.
Yeah, well said. And as you guys see here with this graphic, and this is what I've been saying on RBN for some time now. I don't even have the impression that Nazism was ever defeated. If you asked me that a few years ago, obviously they suffered a giant defeat, but they still going strong. It was essentially adopted by the West. But I'm gonna read the super chat and we can begin to wrap up. There was a great educational show. I pretty much tossed the outline out about 1/3 of the way in. Kind of like, man, this is gonna be just a great educational segment overall. So I appreciate your time. And big shout out to Landrew for the generous super chat. And I want to pass this question for you, Chay. Would FDR have dropped nuclear weapons on Japan? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think he would have.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. It was a crazy thing to do. And since we were talking about Japan, do you guys know the ruling party in Japan, which is deeply unpopular among the youth? This is the party that Shinzo Abe. I apologize, I don't know the exact name of the party. Maybe I can Google it. It was a party that Shinzo Abe was part of. He was a prime minister that was assassinated, and they have a far right party that been in government. The United States propped them up. Shinzo Abe and his party is very close to Neera Tanden in the Democratic Party. What's the name of their damn party? But you guys know the whole point of their party is they're like super nationalistic. Let me pull this up, y'all. I'm blanking on the name of the exact party. But a big part of their politics, and one thing about Shinzo Abe that a lot of Japanese youth don't like, is that they refuse to apologize for the actions that Japan took against China. Like, they deny the rape of Nanjing. They deny that these things happened to this day. There's a big segment of ultra-right people in Japan. And of course, they're the ruling party now because they were propped up by the United States. They deny the atrocities Japan committed. And they often, Shinzo Abe, which is why I said rest in peace, no one who actually knows this guy mourned him. He often said that pretty much dismantling Imperial Japan was a mistake. And a lot of people a lot of Japanese youth don't like this. It's a big
bring back the emperor.
Yeah. There was a big they like big emperor apologists as well. They didn't like, for a lack of a better term, I would say the liberalization of their society from the Imperial Japan mindset. So that's who the party that's in charge of Japan right now. He was the former prime minister, was just assassinated. His protege took over. And they are the ones in charge of this hyper-aggressive anti-China policy. The people who push this pro-empire refuse to apologize for their atrocity politics. These are the people in charge of Japan right now, pushing them to war, that's selling out their people to the West. And the same thing with Japan, because I was doing a lot of reading on this over the last few years. The same problem with Japan we have in the United States, where the youth in Japan, they don't want war with China. They hate reading about the rape of Nanjing. They're very sorry about it, and they see this ruling class party who refuse to accept their atrocities. They despise them. I was learning a lot about this now, but because Japan is an older society, young people don't have a lot of voting and political power. So right now, a lot of Japanese boomers and Gen Xers are propping up this insane neocon party. What does that sound like, ladies and gentlemen? Anyway, Chay, I want to pass it to you for any last thoughts regarding Japan. I want to give you your last thoughts in general. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I think Japan, just on Japan, I think Japan represents the epitome of a hollowed out nation state now. I mean, think about the grimy nexus between Japanese big business and economy and the United States. And of course, maybe it's for another show. We should talk about the power of the dollar, the dominance of the dollar.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And of course, the dollar is the oil that greases this post-imperialist machine of dysfunction across the world. So Japan, remember, has a lot of problems demographically, economically. It's a very vulnerable, fragile place. Its neighbors are not exactly friendly with it in many ways. So America, the United States Treasury, really controls Japan. And I think you see that now as well in Europe, and this synthetic reliance now on American energy, even into LNG into Europe after the destruction of Nord Stream. It's plain to see how the game is played. So you've got a threat of military action, but you've also got the very real threat of economic destruction via the dollar and sanctions. I mean, I've met a lot of people from Iran. I've met people from North Korea, and now in Russia, 18,000 sanctions on Russia. And what you do when you sanction a country to that extent, you basically use an economic nuclear weapon. And what they've done in Russia is they've used their economic nuclear weapon. And the Russians are still walking around, eating ice cream, doing business with the other guys that they can't sanction, because if the US tries to do what it did to Russia, to China, they will completely vaporize their own economy.